Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Criminally, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, horror, I've got some comic and manga recommendations for Horror Mayhem. So yes, this month, May, I'm one of the hosts for the fantastic horror reading event, Horror Mayhem, an event created by the Bookish Bryants. So it's a month dedicated to reading horror, and in particular reading shorter works of horror. So novels under kind of 250 pages and also short stories. We've got weekly prompts for it, and we've also got a bingo card which is stacked with different prompts. I'll leave all of those in the description for the video, but one of those prompts is to read comics, graphic novels and alternative media. So I've got a stack of comics and graphic novels and manga to talk to you about today. But before I do that, I wanted to talk about another way that you can consume horror stories, and that is the new app Storyverse, which I've got running on my iPad here. So Storyverse is available on iOS devices and also Android. It's completely free to download and free to read and watch the stories. And when I say read and watch, that's because that's how you consume stories in Storyverse. So they are not just stories that you read, but equally they're not just videos that you watch. They're a combination of the two, and it's a combination that works really, really well. So Storyverse are working with writers and animators from around the world to bring you a new experience in storytelling, and I've been really, really enjoying it. So as you can see, there are a bunch of different stories on here. The interface for the app is really simple. You can just swipe between the different stories. So we've got here a few horror ones. So you've got Sorcerer, which is one I read and watched the other day, which was very enjoyable. You've got Blood Moon Curse, another one. I haven't read this one yet, but it does look good. One I did read recently that I really enjoyed was Whiteout. So this is a kind of survival horror type story that focuses on a family who are kind of trapped in a snowy landscape, in a traffic jam in their car. They can't get out of the car and things get increasingly creepy as the story progresses. The art style in this one is really good. I really, really like the art style. And the storytelling is excellent as well. So as you can see, it combines, so Storyverse combines these video sections, which are, you know, just enjoyable to watch with kind of full sound and things like that. So you really get immersed in the story. But then you also get text sections. So you also get sections of text that you need to read, which give you kind of more detail, fill in some of the blanks, and the stories flip between those two mediums, and it works really, really well. It's really engaging. I thought the animation in this story was really well done, and the story sections, like the text sections, are excellent as well. I think this is my favourite story that I've read on Storyverse so far, and I've read probably 6 or 7 now. So yeah, a really interesting, fun story, really tense, really gripping, really creepy. I definitely recommend it, and I recommend Storyverse as a whole. As I say, it's completely free, so do check out the link in the description for the video, which will give you links to both the Android and iOS versions of it, and check it out and see what you think, and come back and let me know in the comments if you've enjoyed it. Right, so moving on then to comics, and it occurred to me that Storyverse is kind of a modern way of doing comics. So it's animation rather than static images, but you get the text to read as well. Right, so I've got a few things here to read. So what am I going to be reading comic-wise for Horror Mayhem? So I've got this lovely stack of vintage DC horror comics that I showed a little while ago. So I've got a bunch of these. These were sent to me by Heidi, one of my viewers, so thanks again for these, Heidi. So a combination of House of Mystery, so a bunch of different issues of that, and they all have like kind of short horror stories in them. Put my teeth in. So yeah, really looking forward to diving into these. This one in particular, a vampire one, looks like a lot of fun. And then also got a few issues of Ghosts, which also looks like a great deal of fun. So yeah, really looking forward to diving into these soon. But what I wanted to do in this video as well is talk about some horror comics I have read already that I would recommend. So sticking with DC, one I would definitely recommend, I have got physical copies of these, but they're in the attic and I haven't managed to get them down, is Swamp Thing. So Swamp Thing was like the first horror comic I remember reading. So I remember being on holiday as a kid when I guess I was kind of about 11 or something like that. And the town I lived in, you couldn't get American comics in the newsagents. But when we were on holiday in Norfolk, I think, so by the seaside, I found a newsagents that sold American comics, and I bought a stack of them with my kind of holiday pocket money, and really got into Swamp Thing, and ended up being a fan of Swamp Thing for years thereafter. So Swamp Thing being a kind of a superhero figure, but a monstrous type of superhero. So really dark kind of gothic stories that tap into that sense of like the monster as a sympathetic character. So the monster as a kind of tragic hero almost. So yeah, absolutely love Swamp Thing, and it was the Alan Moore years when I was reading it. So moving on from that, some more American comics. So you can't talk about American horror comics without talking about EC. So I have this lovely Vault of Horror omnibus edition. So EC, you know, a huge publisher of crime and horror comics back in the 50s, whose output caused a moral panic and led to the Comics Code, which meant comics thereafter tended to be a lot milder. So the EC horror comics, you know, did go quite far for their day and are quite gruesome at times. This Vault of Horror, I think, is one of the earlier ones, so it doesn't get quite as extreme as they did with their later stuff. But yeah, just short horror stories, often with a kind of sting in the tail, beautifully illustrated and just really fun to read. And these Dark Horse omnibus editions, which have come out fairly recently, are really beautifully presented. The quality of the paper that I use in these, I think, is far beyond the quality of the original comics. I suspect that EC horror comics have never looked quite as good as they do in these Dark Horse editions. So definitely recommend these. You know, these are like the origins of comic horror in the States. Definitely worth checking out. Moving over to Japan then, so you know, manga clearly is huge at the moment, and the Japanese do horror really well. So I've got 3 different types of horror here to talk about, all of which I thought were fantastic, but very different from each other. So the first one is probably, you know, the name that would immediately spring to most people's minds when you talk about horror manga, is Junji Ito. So I've got here Uzumaki, his fantastically weird, like long form story about a town plagued by these mysterious spirals. I've also got a short story collection by him, which is fantastic, but his artwork is just brilliant. And in common with lots of manga creators, Junji Ito does, you know, both the story and the artwork for this. So different from American comics, which tend to have separate creators doing the art and stories. So Junji Ito's art is always really intricate and often really creepy. I'm going to try and find a creepy image that doesn't spoil things too much. Yeah, so there's some particularly horrific stuff going on in this page. So yeah, Uzumaki is just fantastic, really compelling, really creepy, really weird, just great imaginative storytelling. A different type of horror then is Blood on the Tracks by Shuzo Oshimi. So this is a series that's fairly recently finished. I have got a full review of the whole series on the channel. Really intense and very disturbing psychological horror, but really worth reading, I think, about the relationship between a mother and the son. The mother, who is quite psychologically disturbed and whose, you know, mental health issues impact very much on her son. So a fascinating story. It starts with a truly horrific event in the first volume, and the rest of the series kind of spirals from there, as the son becomes, you know, more and more disturbed by his mother's actions, and their, you know, relationship goes through a number of different phases. So really interesting, mature storytelling. I do think that Shuzo Oshimi is a great storyteller, great imagination, and also the artwork in these is fantastic. So very simple art, much simpler than the kind of intricate stuff that Junji Ito does. But what he does brilliantly is a kind of cinematic style of storytelling. So there are pages in this where you'll get, you know, a kind of image that kind of gradually zooms in almost, for example. And he really uses a kind of cinematic like visual language in his storytelling, which is surprisingly rare in comics. I think comics tend to have their own style of storytelling. There's you know, a definite similarity between cinema and comics in terms of they are a visual storytelling medium, but comics I think tend to have their own way of doing it. But Shuzo Oshimi definitely taps into a very cinematic style of storytelling in his work. So yeah, definitely recommend Blood on the Tracks. And then the final piece of manga I wanted to talk about, completely different from the other two, that's Chainsaw Man by Tatsuki Fujimoto. So this is more of a kind of Evil Dead style of horror. So really over the top, very funny at times, really graphic and gory, very silly at times, but it's just hugely entertaining. So about this guy who becomes possessed by a chainsaw demon, and who can shift from being a normal human into this kind of character you see on the front with chainsaws for arms and a chainsaw for a head, bizarrely. So he's kind of a bit of a loser, the central character in this, but gets involved in kind of demon hunting, and becomes this chainsaw devil in order to hunt demons. A lot of the storylines are about him trying to get laid, basically. So he's definitely an interesting character. As I say, a bit of a loser, but really engaging to read. And the kind of dramatic battles and things like that you get in Chainsaw Man are fantastically entertaining. So yeah, very funny, very fast-paced series, very different from something like Blood on the Tracks, which is much more of a slow burn, but really, really enjoyable and definitely worth checking out if you like. If you fancy trying something kind of silly and fun for Horror Mayhem, do check out the first instalment of Chainsaw Man and see what you think. So yeah, just wanted to talk about a few comics today, give you a flavour of some of the kind of things that are available if you were wondering about things you could read for that prompt. There's loads of horror comics out there, and they often have kind of short story style of storytelling, like the EC horror comics, rather than longer form. So perfect for Horror Mayhem. Yeah, let me know in the comments your favourite horror comics or horror manga. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.